Okay, before you this evening is a kind of a report, a status update on where we are on the Third Street Bridge and Third Street Corridor. I was requested to bring this forward to the council tonight just to really try to, I guess, set the stage for what has gone in the past, where we are today, and where we are heading with the Third Street Corridor as a whole. I know there's been a lot of discussion here at council in the past. There's been a lot of discussion out there in the community about 3rd Street and the corridor and the bridge that is coming. And so the idea here is to kind of follow up on some of the information that's in your packet. There's a report in your packet that details all of this and a lot of other bits of information on the history and detail of the entire corridor and the question of the 3rd Street Bridge. But tonight I want to take a little bit of time to just really kind of talk through how we got here a little bit and then where we are going into the future. So we'll talk a little bit with the history, and I do want to thank Jen Piffner. She was here, she's around, who helped put this slideshow together and pull together some of the history as well. This goes back to 1994 to present. I can say that the history actually goes much further back than that, clear back into the 70s with some of the earliest discussions about a 3rd Street corridor and a 3rd Street bridge. But to start talking a little bit about some of the council discussions, there's been some concern about there that the current project that was included in the fiscal year 18 city budget, which started yesterday, October 1st, that budget included a project funding for the 3rd Street Bridge, and that was kind of sudden. So this section is to really talk a little bit about some of the history and the opportunity that there has been for discussions about this bridge over the course of the years. So really starting back in about 1994, the council started talking about this in a series of goals and mission statements that the council was doing. At that time, they were doing annual goals and missions pretty much all the way up until about 3 years ago. In that particular year, 1994, one of the projects identified was to improve arterials, and specifically the inclusion of a bridge on 3rd Street across Paradise Creek. In 1997, they took it up again in a resolution, 9707, that addressed certain sections of the comprehensive plan. This is the land use plan, and within that plan there are mobility sections, mobility chapters that address connectivity and east-west flow, and the corridor came into the picture again. In 2005, moving forward a few years, there was some discussion about setting up a public meeting regarding the 3rd Street Bridge, which then did occur as a public workshop in October of 2005. So right here in this room, discussion with the City Council about the idea of constructing a bridge and what its history was at that point and the possibility of moving it forward. It did not move forward in the form of a vehicular bridge at that time. In 2007, a couple of years later, the council that was seated at that point passed a resolution, 2007-30, that really put a favor towards a pedestrian and bicycle bridge, a non-vehicular structure at that point. That resolution also authorized the city to accept donations for construction of a bridge. If you'll recall, those that were around, there was a lot of discussion about a citizen initiative to fund a pedestrian bridge to get it constructed. It would not be funded by the city as part of that package. In the course of the next couple of years, the city did receive about $7,700 in donations towards a pedestrian non-vehicular structure. That series of donations ended in about 2008 was the last time we received donations, and it's been sitting there ever since. Most recently, the council has addressed that issue of those donations in August of 2017 in recognition of the 2018 budget, including a vehicular bridge or multimodal bridge, that the council authorized the refund of those donations that are still on the books. A couple years after that, December 2009, another resolution came through adopting an update to the City of Moscow Comprehensive Plan. This was I think the most current comprehensive plan, as I recall, and it did include, again, a mobility chapter that addressed east-west corridors within the community. In April of 2010, the council again set a city goal to improve east-west traffic flow and street connectivity throughout the community, but also specifically to include the 3rd Street Bridge as a way to complete the 3rd Street corridor and enhance that east-west connectivity. August 2010, there was some discussion about a traffic study occurring with regard to 3rd Street Bridge. If I recall, this was during the public comment period with the City Council meeting. Desire to request that a study occur to see what the impacts or potential impacts of a bridge could be. The council then responded at the following meeting on the 16th of August, talking about that very issue again. And then in October of 2011, the first of the discussions regarding a multimodal transportation plan came forward to the council. This was a transportation plan that was intended to address all modes of transportation within the community, so bicycles, pedestrians, cars, buses, all types. Even has a little bit on airports, believe it or not. And it was the first step in hiring a consultant to prepare a multimodal plan for the city. The next step was the actual approval of the consultant agreement, with the idea that this plan would be developed with a lot of public input, a lot of consideration to all modes of transportation and all the needs throughout the community. November of 11, Paradise Path Task Force, that was their name at the time, now the Moscow Pathway Commission, made a presentation to the council about the task force project priorities. And then the follow-up on the end of the transportation plan process in October of 2014, the City Council adopted the plan. That plan does include the 3rd Street Bridge as a recommended alternative, as a vehicular bridge, multimodal bridge, with traffic calming included within the corridor. And in 2015, February, Transportation Commission gave a report to City Council on some of their activities. This included looking at east-west corridors, 3rd Street Bridge, again, coming up in that discussion. And that takes us through the council's activities through that time frame, touching on Transportation Commission as well through some of that period. They started discussions on the 3rd Street and the potential of a bridge back in 2000, and at that point they were focusing a bit also on potential impacts on B Street, recognizing that without a bridge there's more flow going to be. If a bridge was installed at some point, perhaps that number would decrease. In 2005, with the thought that the council was considering the possibility of a vehicular bridge or multimodal bridge on 3rd Street, the Transportation Commission started talking about, well, what could be done to address changes in traffic patterns that might occur with the construction of a bridge. So at that point they were discussing traffic calming measures along the corridor if a bridge was indeed installed. They also picked this up again in June of 2005 when they started talking about other issues related to not just traffic calming, but surrounding issues that might come into play. For instance, the sidewalk system is not complete along the 3rd Street corridor. Should it be? There are some lots that don't have sidewalks today, and at that time, what happens with east-west traffic flow in general across the city, how are pedestrians addressed, what street widths should be involved, what happens to parking that's out there, how does a bridge get funded, how do other improvements get funded. Those types of discussions were occurring back in 2005. The Transportation Commission took up 3rd Street again when we were talking about classification of streets, and this is the classification of local, collector, minor arterial, principal arterial, and in 2007 carried on those discussions again in 2008, whether it should be a collector or a minor arterial, and this has been an item that's been discussed a lot in the community about what should the classification of this street be. In February of 2014, the city was looking at an update to its urban area and functional classification map. This is the map that designates the official classifications of city streets throughout the community. And we'll come back to this again in a little bit, but at that time that update was proposed, presented to the Transportation Commission, and they supported the proposed changes within the plan, the update, that included 3rd Street as a minor arterial class street from Washington to Mountain View Road. And then in October of 2015, a discussion around the 3rd Street Bridge came up again, and at that point there were enough new members on the commission that the discussion primarily revolved around what was the history of this decade of discussion, past discussions that the commission had had regarding 3rd Street, the bridge, and the corridor and street classifications. So the multimodal transportation plan, we talked about a little bit earlier that the council had seen it on a couple of occasions and eventually adopted it. The intent of that plan was to really create a system-wide concept for how transportation could be handled throughout the community. Again, all modes, pedestrian, bicycles, transit, cars, trucks, all of it. In order to get a good feel for how the community viewed transportation and the needs and what were the advantages and disadvantages of the different modes or the system as it existed at the time, the consultants helped the city craft a pretty robust public outreach effort with the idea of gathering as much public input as we could possibly get. And so there were a lot of opportunities to engage with the consultants and with city staff about the study as it was progressing. This really began with an open house right here in the council chambers in April of 2012, first open house where we talked about what we were doing, what we wanted to talk about, what kind of information we wanted to hear from the public. There was a 2-day drop-in workshop. This was actually down at One World Cafe down on Main Street, October 9th and 10th. Was one of those things that was open all day long. Come on in, there's a back room, have a seat, talk about transportation-related issues. Second open house in April of 2014, really talking about, okay, what had they been hearing? What were they hearing from the community, and what kind of information was there? Again, more opportunity for input into the transportation needs and east-west corridors within the city, including the 3rd Street corridor. There was the opportunity to fill out some comment cards. There was opportunity also to do some social media input related to these engagement efforts. So in terms of the methods that people could use to provide input, of course, the comment cards in those workshops. There were maps that were provided at a lot of the workshops and the open houses where people could put their comments directly on the maps, indicate areas where they thought there were concerns, things that could be addressed. There was the consultants were available, staff was available at all these opportunities to have discussions one-on-one with folks about what the plan was doing. There was a social media feature out there where folks could bring comments for online commenting as well. And then in terms of just general advertising, the city did reach out as much as it could, really, to try to help folks be aware of the effort that was going on with the plan. The desire was to really get input on this multimodal plan, talk about all the aspects, and what people thought was needed or what they liked or didn't like within the community. So newspaper advertisements, as you would expect, some email blasts with the university, different press releases that were issued by the city, postings, of course, at City Hall and throughout the downtown. The city's website carried information. There was also a dedicated Moscow on the Move, which is the name of the transportation plan website, that had information about all the meetings and all the different ways to provide input, as well as reaching out on social media through the city's Facebook page and Twitter accounts, and then some blog posts that were put out for a period during the development of the plan. So many opportunities for folks to become engaged within the community and through different venues, different media, to provide input on what was in the plan. So it's important, I guess, just to remember that this is something that was several years in development, several years in the process, lots of opportunities for public input about all the components within the plan itself.